Beware, beware. I am fearless, and therefore I am powerful, said the monster to its maker. Xynergy, how we share decision making in the age of AI. I'm Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist and sustainability engineer. I also serve on the advisory board of Humans for AI. Now, what is Xynergy? Xynergy is a production of offspring totally different from its parent. And this is the question we ask. In the marriage of human intelligence and AI, will we recognize ourselves? Who, what, when, where, why, how, which? These are some questions we must address as we think about the future we want. We are now in a state of future shock. If we were not before, surely COVID has thrown us into that space. It's a VUCA world, complex, volatile, ambiguous, and uncertain. But what is certain is that we seem to be in the middle of a race between human skill as a means and human folly as an end. And indeed, the AI revolution is part of the folly that we might be thrust into. AI is transforming economies, jobs, even society itself, and it's disrupting every sector of society. It has promise and it has peril. On the one hand, we think AI might help us get smarter, more efficient workplaces and organizations, produce, earn. But the peril, privacy violations, deep fakes, algorithmic bias, socioeconomic inequality, weapons automation, all of these things are things that we fear. And so when we think about the future we want, which is a safe, just space for humanity and the sustainable development goals, we really have to ask the questions, can we really get it if we really want it? What I say we must want is also smart futures, sustainable, meaningful, aspirational, resilient, and transformational. So as we think about this shared future and we ask the question how we share decision making, the use of AI and AI rights is critical. Who, what, when, which, where means we have to think about minority and gender rights in this space, data gathering technologies, who is at the table, decision support system, which and when to use, earth rights versus human rights versus corporate rights. How do we make these decisions? And how does AI and the choice of AI and who gets to choose which AI inform this thing that we are creating, this future that is emerging, this future that we are co-created, indeed, the future we want. So we already know, as I said earlier, that when we think about AI, the decisions we have to make around design, development, and deployment are critical because coding bias can impact and will impact almost every areas of our life, right? The fact is, when we think about the situation right now, we see that most of the people in leadership and in coding are male and white, and therefore we find that there's a lack of diversity in those leading and creating our digital reality. And most of the times, their choices reflect themselves. A flourishing futures that we're talking about, a smart futures, demands an AI rule-setting approach that is smart. Again, smart, sustainable, meaningful, aspirational, resilient, and transformational. Indeed, AI should be considered as a public good, a social public good. And one can imagine next year, for example, a theme for this day being AI as a public good and a call to affirm the importance of cherishing AI as a public good in the economic sense that it is supplied by the government or controlled by the government, which we know works typically very well at the national level, but not so well at the international level, because there's no global government, you see, that has the power to impose legislation and to control and coerce people to follow it. Scott Barrett, that is, has a taxonomy of global public goods that might inform our decision making and our thinking about how we enter into this emerging space. Is it going to be an aggregate effort like climate change, or a mutual restraint effort like use of not nuclear weapons or non-use of nuclear weapons, or coordination where we have measurement of time and standards for oil tankers and automobiles and planes and ships? This rule book, how we share our rule book. Where does AI fit? Does it fit in how we share our rule books alone? Or does AI fit also in how we share our planet, how we share our humanity, and how we share decision making? Xynergy, or Xynergy? Which will we choose? Xynergy, of course. Xynergy, Xynergy, Xynergy. Who, what, when, which, where, when. How will life emerge in 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060, when the children born today in the age of COVID will be 40 years old? How will they be living in that life where AI will indeed be all they know? We, perhaps in the baby boomer age, are the last of the Mohicans, the last of those who were born before the age of the smartphone and the smart houses and the smart cars and the smart cities. And perhaps it's only us who can remember that time. So well, let's go into 2050 and imagine AI in the afterlife. Can you imagine a corporation that has an afterlife visitor center and families get to visit these holographic rooms where they can sit and speak to an AI reflected image of their loved ones? Who controls those decisions? Who would decide what is tasteful? How we deal with funerals and crematoriums, if indeed we have this new, what can we call it, a curatorium which curates memories of our loved ones and places them somewhere where we can visit and sit with this holographic image. So is Live Well Corporation possible in 2050? Let's think about that. Now let's look at the year 2045, and we're talking about an elder life. And in this life, we have ocean condominiums where elderly people live a kind of a footloose life. And their cruise ships where they live is a victim of an AI algorithm error that affects their insurance. What would happen in that case? Who would be responsible? Is it the cruise ship? Is it the AI? Whom? 2040, AI in our home life. In this case, in this story, we see smart condo owners who are wealthy, ultra wealthy, super wealthy. Their house is hacked. Can you imagine the ultra rich who value privacy and security hacked into? Who is at fault? Who, on which, when, where? What courts would that be tried in? These are some of the questions that we have to address. Space life, AI-enabled cycling protocols in Lunarville solar power. Could such a story exist in 2035? I think perhaps yes. I am saying clearly that when we think about the world that we're moving into, the story like the one in 2030, AI and beauty life, where we see a cosmetics giant Mary Mag being sued for promoting beauty bias by a women's organization because they feel that their algorithms do not do enough to address bias towards beauty as being light-skinned. This could be possible. And finally, what about the Zen life? How do we think this might happen? Can you imagine robot priests in Japan being cyber attacked and an anarchist group next this being hacking into the program of Vindar, leaving it spouting gibberish or even worse, swear words? It is not so far-fetched. In the future, in life of the future and AI, transportation, manufacturing, healthcare, education, media, customer service, everything you can think of will be enabled, enhanced, and made more efficient with AI. Our jobs with AI ethicists might well be one of the jobs that people aspire to. A coding ethicist that deals with the standards of creating algorithms. A robot recruiter that deals with looking at how to match households and companies to robots. I know it sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But the fact is, we have to be ready to meet this future. We have to get smart. We have to get equipped with the right attitude and the right attitude so that we can truly imagine the world that we are creating versus the world we want to create. Recognize that you can never change things by fighting existing reality. To change something, you have to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And this is indeed what the Smart Futures paradigm is about. It's about helping us think about the design of products, policies, programs, and processes, services that are going to be part of our shared future, part of the way we live our life. And in this case, we might use Barrett's taxonomy to look at how we might treat AI then as a public good. What if we see AI really reaching a singularity? We know humans are driven by self-interest. So then a singularity AI might mean that we would need a mutual restraint public good. versus regular AI, where maybe a combined effort, an aggregate effort, or a single best effort, like what we do for asteroid defense or what we do for climate change, where people, every country, everybody does things individually, but we're still moving together, and developed countries help and assist developing countries. These are things to think about. I thought also it might be interesting for us to look at the Asimov's 3 laws of robotics and see if there's something there, something that we may be able to borrow from these laws known to almost all robotic fans. And switch out robot, put AI. AI may not injure a human being. AI must obey all orders given to it by human beings. AI must protect its own existence as long as it does not conflict with the first and second law. Can these laws help us think about addressing the questions that come up when we begin to think about what systems, what institutions, what rules, what regulations, what policies, what design might we put in place to ensure that indeed AI works together for the good of the common whole? Or we might even look at Japan's principle, 10% of robot law. Is that a space that we can look? Again, switching out the word robots for AI. AI must serve mankind for good. AI must never kill or injure humans. AI manufacturers must be bound for their creations. AI involved in the production of currency or contraband or dangerous good must hold a permit. AI should not leave the country without a permit. Now, that's an interesting one. AI identity must not be altered, concealed, or allowed to be misconstrued. AI must remain identified at all times. And you see where I'm going with this, right? You see that perhaps we can borrow from existing systems that are already being thought out and apply them to this question, because a simple taxonomy like this would be one that would be easily understood by the regular people who must get engaged in this conversation if we're going to ensure that we have people at the heart and center of decision making. We might want to, of course, consider borrowing from another convention on robot ethics. We want European Union Convention on Robot Ethics, I should say, and which talks about establishing standard committees and other committees to deal with these rules. But more important, also talks about introducing a field called robot ethics as part as part of the conversation. And this, I think, is very critical. I think every country at this point should have some working group within the parliament, within the private sector, within academia, within civil society, working together to think about robot ethics, AI ethics, as we move into this future. AI literacy must be paramount. We have to have competencies across a broad spectrum of society so people are able to recognize the potential dangers. We need truth-seeking alternatives. All in all, what we need in terms of leadership is adaptable and agile leadership. These are the critical success factors, and indeed critical because the most important thing is that we have to make friends with uncertainty and change. AI is moving very fast, right? Machine learning and these technologies are moving at a pace probably faster than the speed of light. And so in order to improve our decision making, we have to develop future sense, which is the capacity of individuals to observe oncoming change systemically with sensitivity and sensibility, and to identify emerging challenges and opportunities, applying foresight and the common sense of their own intelligence. So smart futures are ours to create. It is indeed our task to think about the future we want. I want to close by saying this quote from Newton. Newton said, "We can measure the motion of bodies, but we can't measure its human follies." I ask you to be with us as we think about the future we want and smart futures and address the question, Xynergy versus Synergy. Thank you.